Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Baseball Podcast. This is me, Joey P, Joe Pisapia, and today we're talking about the Keeper League targets. We're talking about leagues that are starting up that have keepers involved. Some are 1, some are 10, some are more, some are less. But we're going to talk about some of our favorite targets if you are in one of those drafts this year that's just starting up, guys, in some of the later rounds and some of the early rounds too that we want to target, or if you're in those salary cap drafts, the one you want to spend some money on, or maybe get some nice discounts on later on. The Welsh, of course, is here to help me figure it all out. And don't forget, if you've got drafts coming up, make sure you use your draft simulator because it's right here. Right now, the MLB Draft Wizard is open for business here at Fantasy Pros. So go to fantasypros.com/draftwizard and you could start your mock drafts. You can do it in 10 minutes. Go through, undo. I just did one right before here. Actually, I did 2. I got a B+ on one, and I'm an overachiever. So I went and did another one. Got an A+ on the second one. So clearly, my strategy is starting to take shape here. But you got to get your strategy straight before you get into the 2023 season. You could do that fantasypros.com/draftwizard. Again, go get your draft on. Welsh, why don't you start off with one of your guys on your top 10 list of Keeper League targets for 2023?
I also just wanted to add real quick that not only can you draft and use the Draft Wizard, but you can connect them to your own leagues, which I just did last week.
Yes,
and it is
indeed.
incredibly invaluable when you, even if you're drafting somewhere else, you connect it, you get the projections, you get us who we hate you, we love you, you get all the incredibly fun information, even if you're not drafting on Fantasy Pro. So I just want to point that out because it is one of the most fun tools to use in the off season is a Draft Wizard. And it is not just one thing. It is many things. Okay. We're talking about keeper buys. This one is weird because it doesn't feel like this would be a guy that would be a keeper buy, but Mr. Mike Mayer is going to love me for it on Fantasy Pros. And I'm a big buy-in on this guy. My number 10 as far as keeper pickups this year, I'm going with Ryan Mountcastle. Ryan Mountcastle, by the way, is only 25 years old. He'll start the season as a 26-year-old. Last 2 seasons, he's put up 55 homers and an average of 87 RBI in that time. He's hit around 250 with a couple stolen bases that have been thrown in. But a couple things I've really loved on him over this past season. Expected slug rate this past year was the 8th best in the league at 509, 8th best. That also went with a huge increase from his batting average to his expected batting average, a 250 batting average with a 277 expected batting average. Then on top of it, this isn't a 1-for-1 because they did change the dimensions, and this might just be a part of Orioles in general. But he had the 3rd biggest home run to expected home run differential in the league last year of qualified batters with an over 5 home run differential. 5 homers. He had 22 this past year. That would be 27 homers. And you put all of that together with really good, strong hard hit numbers, an offense that is trying to rebuild a team that is building itself back up. I have a hard time not buying into a post 100 player who's under 27 years old. He's got a ton of underlying analytics in his favor and an expected home run ratio that just looks like it's going to pop back up. I think Ryan Mountcastle is a nice, good, cheap option. Even if he's not your first baseman, he's your corner infielder, and he just qualifies on that young keeper range. So give me Ryan Mountcastle.
All right, number 10 for me on my list. Typically, I'm a little antsy when it comes to catchers. Francisco Alvarez just missed this list for me because he hasn't quite proven it yet in the show. Got a little cup of coffee, but not enough to really know yet. It's more of a dynasty league selection, but instead I'm looking at Adley Rutschman, catcher for the Baltimore Orioles. Last year, 13 home runs, 42 ribbies, hit 254 for the Baltimore Orioles. If you look at the minor league numbers over 180 games, 30 dingers, 111 RBI, hit 281, 390 OBP, 487 slugging, practically a 3-4-5 guy. Everybody knows I love the 3-4-5 guys. He's going to be 25 years old this year. He's in a better ballpark situation now that, you know, they've kind of made some adjustments last year where I think that it's going to look, I know it took away for some, and I know the pitchers in some situations were very pleased. We saw the Orioles make a run last year, but I think Adley Rutschman is one of these special players where it doesn't matter what the ballpark is. Like, you go back and look at him in college. I remember watching him at Oregon State. The guy just absolutely mashed. I mean, he was just unbelievable. He's a first-rate guy too. And I think that stuff matters when you're looking at keepers. Like, guys who are going to be leaders of teams, guys who are going to be out there. Typically with the catchers, you're worried about them giving up some of the offense to learn the pitching staff. I think we got some of that adjustment last year. I think this year it's going forward now. Adley Rutschman is going to be a superstar in the major leagues, and a catcher just not a lot of great options there. There's a few, not a lot of great ones. So in keeper leagues, I think Rutschman's one of those guys. Who's number 9 on your list, Welsh?
Well, I'm going to go with the pitcher. This is a guy that I've talked up a little bit over this offseason. It's Nick Lodolo. First half last year, and only about 26 innings. It really took up a big portion of what he lacked in success. He had a 5.81 ERA. He was pitching to batters over 400 BABIP, 435 BABIP, and over 300 batting average in the second half, which equated to essentially 3/4 of his season. He had a 2.92 ERA. Batters had an under 300 BABIP and a 200 batting average overall. What's interesting about him, there are 20 pitchers. If we're looking at Steamer, I want to point out the bat and the bat X is now out, and these numbers look lower. But Steamer had projected 200 strikeout pitchers. There were 20 of them this year. I believe the bat has around 14. There were only 2 pitchers that were outside the top 100 in overall ADP that had those 200 strikeouts. Those teammates, Hunter Green and Nick Lodolo. The difference, Nick Lodolo used 10% or more on pitches compared to a 2-pitch pitcher that Hunter Green is. 10% or more on 4 different pitches for Nick Lodolo. Green had a really great 28% whiff rate on his slider last year with a 40% usage. Lodolo, on his curve, which he used 30% of the time, had a 46% whiff rate. Almost the exact same K percentage and a full mile per hour less on his EV, Nick Lodolo. I think he's just really primed for a big breakout. He's more of a control pitcher, where Hunter Green's a little bit more of a power pitcher. He's also a big analytics guy. Nick Lodolo, outside the top 100 overall, a young pitcher on maybe not a great team in a bad pitcher environment. All things to consider, I think makes Green more volatile. And I'm a Nick Lodolo guy, so he's someone I'd be buying in on Dynasty and even keeper leagues, who doesn't cost, especially in keepers, not going to probably cost you top 100.
Here's a sneaky guy in keeper leagues, too. I don't think it's going to cost you as much as you might think. At 23 years old last year for the Cleveland almost said Indians. Nope, Guardians. Oh, my goodness. I won a whole season without saying it. And this is what happens, when you're still coming off of football, your mind is still fuzzy. 17 homers, 20 steals. I think in Roto leagues, Andres Gimenez is a guy that people are just really sort of coming around on. Certainly a breakout year last year. He's so young still. He's going to have that job for the foreseeable future. He's in a good situation there. I think that the Guardians did well here in this trade when they gave up Francisco Lindor. Having watched him come up through the Mets system, I saw a lot of Gimenez. It was just whether or not you would grow into any power. And I think last year flashing that 466 slugging, that was a big positive for him. And the 297 batting average was terrific. I mean, this is a guy who's going to hit for batting average, hit for power, give him stolen bases. In Roto leagues, he might be one of the best return on investments in keeper leagues right now. So I like the ADP in those situations, and I like the player. I think he's got maybe another gear, but even if he just becomes this guy's pretty good to keep, especially in those deeper keeper leagues. All right, Welsh, who is number 8 for you on your list of 2023 keeper league targets?
Well, it's another one of these young guys that's really interesting. In redraft, he comes at a cheaper cost. He's going to be a little bit more expensive in keeper leagues. But you know what? It might not tick up to a crazy degree. Go with Vinnie Pasquantino with the Kansas City Royals. Is one of those guys that's on a little ho-hum of a team overall offensively that I don't think really helps. But, Vinnie was pull heavy, and the power wasn't insane. And about 300 plate appearances, he had 10 overall. But when you talk about those expected home run differentials, Mountcastle's number 3, Pasquantino, number 4, was number 4 in the league. 10 homers with an expected 14.8 on that home run total. You pair that with an expected batting average that was within right on his overall batting average, 295 batting average, a 289 expected, no big difference. Had a higher X slug of 450, it was 476 on his expect slug, which you've got to love. And overall, when you just take a look at him, there's big EV numbers, had almost 113 max EV overall. I think a lot is working in favor of a guy that doesn't strike out a whole bunch, is going to hit for power, that doesn't show up quite yet. A lot of underlying things work in favor of it. And if you do have a Royals team that tries to manufacture and you get Mondesi back in there, they're running a little bit more. It's more RBI opportunity, even though they kind of stink overall. Vinnie Pasquantino doesn't. He walks, he doesn't strike out, he makes lots of contact, and there's power that's going to come in there. Little Italian breakfast there for you, Joe. Vinnie Pasquantino.
I love a good Italian breakfast. Can't get enough. Little espresso, maybe a biscotti. Very nice.
Very biscotti? Nice.
Biscotti. Yeah. What
What's
do
a
you call
biscotti?
them?
I don't know.
What's a
What a biscuit?
biscotti? What
Oh, a
a
biscuit. You like a biscuit?
No, a biscotti. You don't know what a biscotti is?
No.
No. Oh my goodness. After the show, I'm gonna have to send you a whole case. Yeah, it's you dunk them in the coffee. It's like this Italian little biscuit cookie thing, and it's kind of
Oh.
shaped almost like a long U-ish kind of thing. And there's chocolate. There's different one. I mean,
Ooh.
I'm gonna have to educate you on some of the Italian
Yeah, me
finer
and Vinny.
things.
Maybe Vinny can educate me.
Yeah,
Hey,
I'm
Vinny,
sure
hit
he
me up.
can. Wander Franco, buy low.
Mm.
Okay. Jeez. Can we not overreact? He's barely old enough to drink. I mean, 22 years old here. And I know last year was disappointing. I was disappointed. I was expecting big things. I was expecting a power surge. It didn't happen. Injury happened instead. But there's a reason why the Rays committed so much money to this player. He is a special player. He is still just 22 years old. In the minor leagues, he hit 335 with a 400 OBP over 224 games. And if you combine and look at the last two seasons, he's got 150 games there, 13 home runs, 72 RBI, 10 steals, 282 batting average. That's something to build on. I mean, I just don't think we're being fair to the Wander Franco evaluation system yet. And Wander Franco, maybe he'll never be a 40 home run guy, but I do think at some point he's going to be a 25 to 30 home run guy. And I think it's going to be sooner than you realize. And I think you're in the unique position to buy low almost in keeper leagues on him for the first time and maybe the last time you're going to be able to do that. Certainly in the last couple of years, he was very hyped. He should be hyped. He's that good of a player. The Rays are the Rays, and they're always going to have some deficits there offensively. But I think for me, Wander Franco is that perfect price this year to buy low in these keeper league drafts on him, or if you're in a keeper league, buy low on him and just enjoy this player for the next decade, because I think he's going to be an absolute star. And we're just getting started still with Wander Franco. Let's not overreact to a down and disappointing year. All right, next on the list here, that's my number 8. Number 7 for you, your keeper league target for 2023.
So I'm going to jump up the board. This doesn't necessarily have to be a board where we're up at the top and then we come down to the top guys that draft overall necessarily. Not mine. This is kind of ranking and like how I'm approaching this. So I'm going to jump up the board to definitely a higher ADP player. But in a keeper league, I don't know if there's a priority, and I think there's still some value to be had at third base. I'm going to go with Austin Riley. And I know you're thinking to yourself like, well, okay, Austin Riley might be a second round player. Keeper leagues, you start to get some of the young guys in there that might push down. If you're talking about dynasty, Austin Riley is a player that actually could push into the third round in some places because he doesn't steal bases. And I think there's an overall question I think people overall have maybe in the power. My point here is Austin Riley is the type of guy that I think can still push higher and can maybe get you into a first round overall value. That's what I still think is on the table, especially if he pushes back a little bit. And Austin Riley this past year had the 8th best slug percentage in the league, or number, and he had the 6th best expected X-slug. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy to improve off of that. Those power numbers are absolutely real. 71 homers over the last 2 years. His RBIs ticked down a little bit. His strikeout numbers came down, but his batting average came off. He was a 300 hitter the year before. He ticked down to 273, and I think there's some value. I would not be surprised if Austin Riley pushed 40 homers this year and pushes up 100. He's more of a fat four category player. Maybe 3, but I would buy in on keeper leagues because he's still really young. And this is a player that could be a first round overall talent if you can get him in the late 2nd or 3rd round.
Yeah, and some of these guys we're going to talk about today, obviously the prices are going to vary. We're going to talk about the premium guys and the reason why you want to pay for some of them. And we're going to talk about some guys in the middle and some of the guys we just mentioned too. Pasquantino probably going a little later in drafts there. Still a little unknown, still divisiveness there on the opinion. Wander Franco kind of coming off a down year. Lots of different evaluations of a lot of these players. And again, we're trying to give you a range so you know exactly, how you can approach some of these drafts. And look, we're going to talk about some big time players and why they're still worth that big investment.
And Franco's fascinating, by the way. It's a time for another conversation we can have, but Franco is ultimately fascinating because I'm not sure there's a player in keeper and dynasty formats that has a wider range of valuation than Wander Franco. Anywhere from the top 25 down to maybe his redraft value, which is in the 90s. So there is a wide spectrum of outcomes for him as far as how people value him. And that's what makes him really intriguing, especially if you're in a league where that value is quite a bit lower and someone's in the 60s or 70s is kind of given up because the counting stats will never catch up. And I agree with you. I don't think that's necessarily the case.
And for me, I'm trying to look for guys too who have proven something in the major leagues already. Like these are guys that, again, not pure minor league talent guys who have shown you at least something here in the major league level. And one guy's shown you a lot so far, and he's still just 25 years old. Again, a lot of these guys, I'm trying to stay in that 26 and under range too. So I know like the prime of their career is still ahead of them, which is the 28 to 31 years. That's the prime typically of these players. So Kyle Tucker hasn't hit the prime yet, but he's got 2 back-to-back 30 home run seasons with 90 plus ribbies. He's going to steal bases, 25 last year. The batting average did take a tumble year over year. That's fine. But if there's one guy too, along with Corey Seager, where the shift change is going to help him, it's going to be Kyle Tucker. Back-to-back years playing over 140 games as well. He plays at a good ballpark, surrounded by good lineup support. There's a lot to like here with Kyle Tucker. And this is a player too that is going to continue, I think, to even get better. But you've seen, my goodness, what a high ceiling he has. There might be another gear in Kyle Tucker where you get all of the high batting average, you get all of the 30 plus homers, you get 15 steals, you get everything in there in one season altogether. I think it's very possible. I think it's probably coming very quickly. So he's one of these guys that I think is starting to, he's a first round talent in many redraft leagues already, but we're talking about salary cap leagues and issues where you're going to look at how much you want to pay for a player. This is a guy that's already shown you what he is. And I think the best is still yet to come with him, which is huge. And I think Kyle Tucker's in a good spot right here at 26 years old to be a great investment where you might even overpay to get him. What do you think about Kyle Tucker, Welsh?
Yeah, I'm into this. I mean, I actually had this really fascinating debate just the other day. We were talking about Mookie Betts versus Kyle Tucker, and that's the range that he's living in right now. Stolen bases, we can question how real they're going to be, but the power is there, the hit tool's there. We're just one of those guys too that just you look and you're just like, why are you not hitting for more average? And kind of like Austin Riley, I also kind of think people are just not caught up on like the true value that he holds in keeper leagues, especially with top end power and speed. So yeah, I'm with that. I'm pretty aggressive on him. He's a top 10, no doubt. So anytime you can get him outside of that, whether it's dynasty keeper, that's another thing to point out as well. Dynasties and keepers are not necessarily valued in the same way. That's something I had to adjust because I do a huge top 400 dynasty list, but keepers are they're all not created equal because you could be keeping 2 or 3 or 5 or 10. So there's so many different ways to look at it. So proximity is more important. And that's also why we're not sitting here talking about Elly De La Cruz or Jackson Chourio in these keeper formats, because there's just so many different ways it can go.
Right. And when you're talking with a player like Mookie Betts, he's going to be 30 this year. Kyle Tucker, I'd rather have Kyle Tucker than Mookie Betts. Like,
Agreed.
Even if the stolen bases never reached Mookie Betts levels or sustainability, that's why I prefer Kyle Tucker, because I think, when you give me 5 extra years on a guy, it's a no-brainer. Next guy on the list for you, number 6. Who is it?
Number 6, I'm going to go with the exact opposite of everything we just talked about. I'm going to go with a player that has very little track record, but he's a player that in a keeper format, he still is prospect eligible, but he's a player that you're going to want to get. And, his price is a little bit higher right now in redraft, which pushes it up, but there is top 2 round upside. I'm talking about Corbin Carroll with my Arizona Diamondbacks. And Corbin Carroll is coming off of a phenomenal minor league season where he had 28 home runs. I got to go through because he had some complex level time here. He had 28 homers between complex and the major leagues. And I think there's a lot of questions that people have on him overall about like, where is this power going to come from? Because he looks like a smaller guy. One thing I have cited multiple times, Corbin Carroll in his entire minor league stint since 2019 has only once had an ISO under 200. So I want you to think about that. ISO, a measure of like overall power, and it has only been under 200 once, and that was at rookie ball as an 18-year-old in 2019. Since then, not a single level has it ever been under that. It's not crazy strikeout numbers. It's always been a good batting average, and it's elite speed. It is top 1% in the overall in the league for speed totals. And you look at projections. Listen, Steamer, I think, is more aggressive. 20 homers, 19 stolen bases. The Bat X kind of kills him a little bit, down to 12 homers and 16 stolen bases. I think you can make arguments across the board on where the power is going to be, but here's what I know. Everybody is underselling the speed. The speed numbers will beat every projection system this year. If he leads off for the Diamondbacks, even half the time, like lefties and righties, he's going to have some good run totals. They're going to manufacture runs. And I am a believer in Corbin Carroll. He costs a little bit more in all formats, but I think the upside and the return I don't want to do the old Bobby Witt stuff, but I'm just saying 30 stolen bases is in my mind, and we might have 15 to 20 homers. And there's a similar player that put those numbers up last year.
Sure was. Carroll's a guy on my radar too. Going to talk more about him later in the week, but 2023 Rookie of the Year National League should be top of the board guy, in my opinion. Like that's, if you're going to be making those wagers right now, like that's the guy you're looking at. I think one of them anyway. But another great point too about just because it's a small player doesn't mean he can't hit for power. I mean, Dustin Pedroia hit for power. Jose Altuve hit for power.
Mookie bucked that
another
trend.
Guy hit for power.
Yeah, Mookie. Actually, I've always been very intrigued. I never went and did this. I was going to do this a while back. I wanted to do this big minor league comparison on Corbin Carroll and Mookie Betts. I mean, he is smaller than Mookie at this point, but Mookie never built into some big, crazy, big physical specimen or anything like that. And Corbin Carroll has completely transformed his body. And this is a guy that, for his size, is jacked, is very smart, analytical. I really believe in the hit tool. I worry about slumps that are going to go on and how he's going to adjust, but he's done it at every stop of his minor league career.
Yeah. Next guy on my list is actually the oldest guy on my list. Old man Shohei Ohtani at 28 years old. And that's kind of why he's not higher on the list. Even though he's probably the best player in baseball, even though in most leagues he should be the guy, it's the pitcher and the hitter, there's also a huge risk in this because he's the pitcher and the hitter. It's the same thing we come through every single year with this player, which is if he has a pitching related injury, it takes him out most likely of being the hitter as well. So this is the go big or go home. But in the situations, I think, especially in the keeper leagues where you're limited to a 3-year window on a player, Ohtani, you could argue, is the number one because it is go big or go home. You can go win a couple years with Ohtani at that peak. You are in the peak of Ohtani right now. It's not going to get potentially better than this. I think you've seen the absolute top. If it does get better than this, that's unbelievable. But you're experiencing the prime of Ohtani. And if you're in a keeper league that, again, has limitations on it, it's one thing when you can keep a player forever or you have the escalating contracts on them or any of those situations. But if you're in one of those situations where it's just you can keep the player 3 years and that's it, this is the time to go in on Shohei Ohtani because you are getting a player in his prime, who's getting a pitcher and a hitter in those leagues specifically where you can use him as such. He's a special talent, and he's going to be playing somewhere else other than LA. And there's a good chance wherever that place is, it could be an even better environment for him potentially because, Mike Trout just hasn't been around that much in these last couple of years to play with him, unfortunately. And the rest of that team is very, I would say, how do I put it nicely here with the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim? Stars and scrubs. Is that the best way to say it? Is that the best way to say it?
Yeah, it's a total
heavy.
like
I guess
it's a total it's like an
say
auction valued stars and studs and scrubs. It's like they spent all their money on 2 spots and they're trying to make it up in other areas.
Yeah, and that's not going to work. But Shohei Ohtani, I mean, the talent, what we're talking about here, a perennial MVP candidate. But look, the oldest player for a reason. I don't have him in the top 5. It's because of the danger you still have with him. But you can't argue the next 3-year window for Shohei Ohtani. All right, let's go to your number 5. We're in the top 5 guys now. Things are getting exciting. Who's your top 5 keeper league target of 2023?
Yeah, and only thing I just want to add to that is I do try to think very much in keeper dynasty in 3-year windows. So I think it's why you can also give a little bit more of a leeway to even 29, 30-year-old players that they can push or maintain value. Ohtani's one of those guys. Really think in that window.
But when you're talking about Ronald Acuna, who's going to show up on our list here.
Yes.
It's different, when you've got an extra 5 years potentially or 4 years on a player who's already shown you he's elite. That's no comparison, especially when you're trying to spend money on a salary cap league on that.
I actually think an incredible debate is Acuna at his age and level right now versus Ohtani in a daily moves one player between pitcher and hitter format. Like
interesting.
That is an ultimate debate that we're not going to have, but it's 100%.
Maybe some other time.
Maybe some other time. My guy I'm going to point out here is almost laughable to people who followed us all year last year because I'm going to tell you about Oniel Cruz. Yes, Oniel Cruz is on this list because now we're not dealing with the insane expectations of a rookie coming up, and he's had some time, and we actually saw some improvement on Oniel Cruz. Obviously, his strikeout numbers overall were the biggest concern, almost 35%. It was in the 40s early on, was a big worry. His batting average kind of struggled, but he improved a decent amount on the second half of the season. He hit 204 in the first half in limited games. Second half, he ended up hitting 245, stole a few more bases. Power numbers came up. Projections pretty favorable across the board. Here was something I had put together, and this is based on Steamer, just really quickly, was based on Steamer's projection. They had him at 27 homers and 18 stolen bases in 130 games with a 250 batting average. Those are insane numbers. Well, there's only 3 players that put up those type of numbers last year. Kyle Tucker, who went 30-25, Jose Ramirez, who went 29-20, and Julio Rodriguez, who went 28-25. So you take the second half numbers, you take those projections, and you're looking, what do all those guys have in common? I've said this before. First rounders, they're first round talent. So there's first round talent built in the upside of Oniel Cruz. Now, if you want to get down to earth a little bit, the strikeout numbers are still a concern, but even the Bat X still is projecting him essentially as a 2020 guy. 22 homers, 19 stolen bases, under 30K percentage, and an almost 250 batting average. Listen, if he hits 250, he's hitting 30 homers. He broke StatCast last year. The hardest hit ball ever, 122 miles per hour. I think there are tons of warts in his game, but I do think Oniel Cruz is going to be streaky with enough talent that he's going to put up ridiculous numbers. It's like old school Javier Baez stuff with maybe even less of a swing and miss in there. But the stolen base and the power numbers are real. The context of the team limits the runs and RBI. You should buy in on him. I would buy in on him. Even if he's risky, it's outside the top 40 or 50 in a lot of places with first round potential. Those are the type of guys in keeper leagues I'm going to take a shot on, and that's why Oniel Cruz is on the list.
What a difference a year makes. Last year, just trying to push people away from Oniel Cruz. This year, we're pushing towards Oniel Cruz. But I think you're right. I think it's a much better circumstance now and a much better concept of how much he can give you this year as opposed to what he could give you last year. And look, projectability, 30-20 could be this year. It's very possible he could put that season together. It was unlikely he was going to do it last year, which is why
that was my problem.
We were kind of pushing away from him.
Well, also just pointing out the day, like it was like the day he debuted, he became the NL favorite for Rookie of the Year, which was like absurd to me.
And did not finish in the top 2 for that award.
Well, he was not a Brave.
From Atlanta did. He was not a Brave. Well, that happens sometimes. Number 5 on my list, and the only reason he's not top 3 is because he has had some injuries around the knee. He is a bigger guy too, so you always wonder about how those guys are going to age sometimes. But Yordan Álvarez is that dude. I mean, he is a special talent, and depending on your league eligibility situations too, there's limitations here, and there is some concern. Whenever you have a younger player who's had a history of some knee issues early on, that doesn't always bode well, especially for the bigger guy. But we've seen plenty of big guys like David Ortiz play well into their late 30s and be extremely productive. So I think he is worth the risk. I think he's an incredible talent. Obviously, we all know he is. If you look at that 162 average for this guy, 43 home runs, 125 RBI already, 296 batting average, 973 OPS. I mean, it's off the chart. He makes baseball look so damn easy. He's only 26 years old too, so he's, again, still a few ways away from entering his prime. But I think when you get to the true prime of this player, you're looking at like a 41-20 kind of guy. Like that's how unbelievable I think the ceiling of Álvarez is, and we haven't even gotten there yet. I think we are just kind of getting teased a little bit. If you're asking me, the early wager guy for leading the major leagues in home runs for me, it's Álvarez. He's just got to play enough games to do it, and I think he can. And look, I expect a little regression from Judge, who hit 60 last year. Like you can't get a guy hitting 60 home runs every year. At least we don't think so. But we'll find out more. But Álvarez, to me, again, the only reason he's not top 3 because of those little issues. I would put him right at number 5, though, because the bat is just too good to ignore. Is he going to steal the bases? No. Is he going to give me incredible power and everything else I want across the board? Yes. That's good enough for me. I want him on the squad. Now we're getting into the top 4 here. Very exciting stuff. Welsh, who's your number 4 guy on the Keeper League targets for 2023?
Yeah, you won't like this one from previous conversations, but Shohhei McClanahan. I'm very much in on Shohhei McClanahan. One of my favorite things about him, and I've mentioned this before, was he had a dramatic change in his pitch mix, and he ended up going from an 8% change up to the second most thrown pitch of all pitches. And what's so great about that is it ended up pushing his slider, which he now has 4 pitches he throws over 15% of the time. So it's a really good mix. 4 pitches have an over 44% whiff rate, one of those being the changeup. I haven't gone to look at this. I'd be fascinated to know. I don't know if there's a pitch being used 25% or more that any pitcher has a lower exit velocity hit against. It is at under 84, 83.6% EV. or 83.6 mile per hour EV on average against that changeup. I don't know if there's another pitch that's used that much who has a lower hard hit rate against. And he was able to deaden it a little bit more. I love the whiff rate. I love the mix. He struggled a little bit in the second half where the K numbers dropped. His ERA went from like 2.5 to 3.5, but I think he's an elite pitcher. I think you're actually going to get more of a discount on him. In Dynasty, he's my number one Dynasty pitcher because you're still looking at a very young, I mean, especially when you're comparing against the rest of the crew. He's 25 years old. 25-year-old pitchers with a little bit of a discount in a keeper format with, I think, really sustainable changes, pounds a zone. He gets his Ks. Don't love the second half, but listen, like this is still an adjustment period. This isn't a guy who's 28 years old and has multiple 200 seasons under him. So I'm very big on buying on Shohei McClanahan.
You'll see no pitchers on my top 10 lists. Just
fair enough.
A difference here.
Why not? Yeah.
And that's how I look at this. Like if you're talking about elite keepers, like the 10 guys that I like in terms of target value, either their round or the player they are, or I'm willing to overpay for them in salary cap leagues, no pitchers, because I will figure that out later. I will find a way to piece it together. They're just not great investments anymore. Long gone are the days of Randy Johnson, Pedro Martinez. I mean, Randy Johnson was such a great keeper back in the day. Every year, 280 strikeouts, 300 strikeouts, throwing 230 innings. Pedro, even, there were a lot of guys in that era not that long ago that were very good investments. Every single year you knew what you were getting out of them. Not now. I just can't get there with these guys.
Scherzer is back. Scherzer was another one of those guys as well. But yeah, I agree. It's more volatile. I guess my definition is more defining players that I think have bigger upsides from where they're being valued. And that's why only two come up on this list. But they're kind of like my two key guys this year.
Well, one guy came up on my list last year. He's going to come up on my list this year still. 23 years old, Bobby Witt Jr., shortstop for the Kansas City Royals. 150 games last year, 20 home runs, 30 steals. Definitely a rough start. There's no doubt about that. But if you stayed true and you trusted the process, and we did, you got rewarded. Now, he hurt you last year in head-to-head formats. In the beginning of the year, there's no doubt about it. The guy hurt you. There's no other way to put it. But in the roto formats, if you stayed patient, you got rewarded. And let that be a lesson for you, too. With the young players in the roto format, you can have more patience. It's hard in the head-to-head formats to have the patience. But I think we're just getting started with this guy. Again, this is another player that has even more upside. Welsh, you mentioned that it's not the greatest offense. The guy still had 80 runs scored and 80 RBI with the Royals last year. Yeah. I still think that's something that we kind of overlook. We talk about the power and the speed, but he still scored 80 runs and he still drove in 80 runs as a rookie. That's an incredible thing to do. He's a star in the making. Eventually the OBP will come up. The batting average will come up. You saw the second half numbers, the OPS, all that stuff came up in the second half. It's only going to get better from here. This is a player 23 years old in a premium position too, that you go and you target. So while some people might be looking at, some other big time shortstops, I would still be paying extra for Bobby Witt. And I understand why some people would still want some of the guys ahead of him on the list. And you see him on the ranks of FantasyPros too. I think this is the guy that I'd be targeting, Welsh. That's my dude. All right, let's go to your number 3, top 3 time for the 2023 Keeper League targets. Who's number 3?
Well, a guy that I thought was actually valued like Bobby Witt is no longer, and it's Bo Bichette. Bo Bichette is one of those. He used to be Bobby Witt, and now as a 24-year-old is cast aside and redrafted and even keeper, where I think he's barely even a second-round pick in a lot of places, and I'm just not done. He has had a kind of significant decrease over 4 years if you look at it as a total as far as like batting average and slugging has gone. But this is a guy that actually pushed his hard hit numbers higher than they'd ever been before. Barreling is still there. And even those expected stats, they're not going that much further down. I don't know if projections know what quite to do with the stolen bases because he went from 25 to 13. The power numbers were relative, but he's consistently playing. This is a sub 25-year-old guy that has 20/20 upside in a great offense who still hits the ball incredibly hard. I'm not ready to give up on Bo Bichette. I think you actually get him in kind of a good deal. Like you couldn't even imagine trading Bichette for Bobby Witt at this point, and I don't think they're incredibly far off. Now, if the stolen base numbers go away, it's going to cap them a little bit, but Bo Bichette is still a great buy in keeper leagues.
All right. Speaking of great buys, this might be the 1 year maybe you get any kind of discount on Juan Soto. 24 years old. I'm just never going to give up on Juan Soto and all my love for him. Now, he's not 1 or 2. Maybe last year we do this list. He's my number 1 guy. He's number 3. still the consistency of Juan Soto is just unbelievable. Now, I understand last year, down year for him. This is a player with a 287 career batting average, so I'm not going to freak out the fact that he played with a Washington team that was dreadful, had nobody in front of him, nobody behind him. It was absolutely the dregs. All the rumors about being traded, contracts, all that stress. He's still a young player. I think that affected him mentally. He's a tough kid, but still, I think that affected him, and I think the change affected him. I think he just flat out pressed too much. How many times have we seen the guys, whether it be Bryce Harper, Carlos Beltran, all these years, the guys who end up somewhere else or in a big contract, they press. They press. This is the same kind of thing. You went to a situation where it's like, okay, I got to be, Juan Soto, superstar guy in San Diego, and it just didn't happen. Relax. It'll be fine this year. They've got so much talent around this guy. He's a phenomenal player. He's going to be playing for a contract pretty soon too. And you're getting a player, once again, I'm looking for upside. Yeah, there's still upside. His best season, 34-110. I think he can go 41-20 easily. I think there might even be more in the right circumstance for him. Juan Soto is a generational talent. Does he give you the stolen bases and that stuff? No, but in those OBP leagues especially, he's about as good as it gets. I mean, a career 424 OBP guy. And that is something that's really hard to find these days. So if you're in that format, you could even argue Juan Soto over some of the other guys too, because you can find stolen bases. Finding guys that get on base at the clip that Juan Soto does consistently with the power he has, consistently with the batting average he typically has consistently, it's hard to find. Give me Juan Soto, still the one Juan in my heart. Going to your number 2 guy, Welsh, who is it?
Well, let's do this. I'm going to make an alteration here because we have, I purposely tried to be different from your list. I agree with lots of your players. Mm-hmm. This is one that I missed. I didn't see that we had the same guys. This is my number 1. He's your number 2. So let's talk about him together. I think it's one of the most important ones. And I can give you, I actually think maybe the most fascinating conversation as my number 1. And it's Ronald Acuna, who we both have. I did not notice that you had him at 2. I have him at 1. And, I think this is the number 1 overall player in redraft this year. I think there is debate and question as far as keeper and dynasty. He is in the top 3 conversation of overall players. I think Ohtani in daily leagues, you have to still look at the guy that is your number 1, you have to look at, and Acuna's in that list. And even when he struggled last year, still was able to put up power, had top 15 biggest differential between home run and expected home run. He still was in like the top 2 or 3 or 5 in stolen bases in under 120 games last year. He compensated, which is exactly what you want. It's a great lineup. Ronald Acuna is young. The power, it's a non-worry. The hard hit numbers are there. Everything is still there. Ronald Acuna is an easy buy. He's your number 2. I'll place him at 2 so we can be together. And what's important here is us focusing that Ronald Acuna at any discount in a keeper league based off of maybe suppressed power numbers or people worried about injury is a buy. And I know you agree with me.
100%. Look, he is the only reason he's not my 2 is because of who number 1 is, which I'm shocked that your number 1 is not the same as my number 1.
Well, he is, but I tried to be different. I tried to be different. I didn't want to have all the same names. He would easily be my number 1 buying keeper in Dynasty overall. So just know that. I completely agree.
Look, Ronald Acuna doing what he's done, and it's funny because we even touched on it last time we did the show, which is people were worried about the stolen bases after the knee injury. Well, I mean, came back, stole 29 in 119 games. It's stunning. The power, I didn't drag, but I mean, the power was the thing that, wasn't quite where it was. I'm not worried about Acuna. He's going to be 25 years old this year. The prime is still way ahead of him. Now, is there a time where you might start to look at Acuna and say, okay, is the 41 home run season an outlier? Yeah, I think we'd have that conversation. I mean, might be, but is he a player that's still maybe your best bet for 30-30 every year or one of the top guys? Yeah. And I think that's what you have to come back to is that 30-30 situation. And not to mention, I have 3 outfielders in my top 3. Outfield is not good.
Nope.
Take a look. It is bad. And in those leagues where you have to play 5 or 4 even, it's rough. Acuna's value is very high. Soto's value is very high. So for me, Acuna is, again, number 2. I can argue number 1, but the guy I like at number 1 is just, I think, another special generational talent where we're looking at players with even more upside. Why don't you go for your number one too, since we both had Acuna there towards the top?
And again, understanding the context of it, this is, I think, is an important guy. This is my number one important conversation, attempting to be different from your list, because I think your guy is the number one keeper dynasty player in general. Again, taking Ohtani's context out, but it's Fernando Tatis Jr. And I think it's one of the most important keeper league, keep your eye on situations where Fernando Tatis is coming off of, in 2021, of course, a 40, 20, 42, 25 overall season. Insane numbers, where in 50 games in 2020, still with 17 and 11. I mean, he was pacing to put up these same incredible numbers. Now, obviously, there's questions around whatever steroid usage was out there and what effect that's going to have. But what you're still doing is you're still looking at a 24-year-old. He just turned 24 years old. All year, he'll be 24 years old. He's had some injury stuff. Obviously, might be moving more to an outfielder with them bringing in Xander Bogaerts and everything like that.
No, because I look at shortstop and I'm looking for the guys like, you got Witt, Lindor, Simeon, Seager, Trey Turner, Bichette, all these guys, Xander Bogaerts, Tim Anderson, Swanson, Oniel Cruz, Franco, Gimenez. Like, shortstop's pretty good. I almost feel like he is more valuable in fantasy in the outfield now.
I couldn't agree more. I could care any of the guys that I take in the first round. I really don't care about your position for the most part. Like Jose Ramirez, the differentiating factor between maybe him and Trey Turner might be that he has third base, and you might side on that. But I don't care. I don't care that I have Trey Turner as a shortstop. I don't care about Tatis as a shortstop. I actually care that I get him more in outfield. There's more value. I could go and take Dansby or Xander later, and I can go and put Tatis out in the outfield because it stinks this year. So no, it might keep him a little bit healthy. He's still an elite power speed combo player. You are obviously stepping into a situation where maybe he's more volatile because you don't know what you're getting coming off of A, 2 surgeries in the offseason, and B, steroid allegations. But I don't think that retracts from the insane talent of who he truly is. And I'm willing to take the buy, and he's under 25 years old. He's got a suspension coming up for this year. You take all of that in, you could do a keeper. You guys could do a keeper league where he's not drafted in the first round. His ADP is in the second round for redraft, but you might have a wheel pick in a keeper league where he is not taken, and he's a must take. He's a top 3 overall keeper league dynasty player, regardless of the stupid month he's missed. And it's a great buying opportunity. So if you want to chalk this up as top 20, top 10 keeper league, pay attention to buys, guys you need to know, Tatis is as important as anybody on this list because there's inherent value compared to who we both agree is like the number one keeper player who you have on your list.
Well, it's funny too. If you go back 2 years ago, Tatis is probably number one on this list. On both of our
he was number one on my list before any of these
issues.
Right,
and I think we can't forget that. Does he have a lot of risk? Yeah. Is it a little bit more inherent now? We've gotten to know the player better.
Yeah,
maybe. And there's a chance that San Diego could flip him somewhere else. Like, he's got a huge contract, but maybe they decide they like Soto instead, and they're going to move Tatis, and that contract might be appealing to somebody else and say, lock up this young kid instead.
I mean, who are the teams that are going to bring him on, by the way? Like, is anybody going to dislike Tatis? I was about to say, is anyone going to dislike Tatis if he's a New York Yankee? I mean, maybe personally, but not fantasy-wise.
No, not fantasy-wise. Well, the number one fantasy guy, look, we tried our best to be patient last year and calm about Julio Rodriguez, and I give Welsh a lot of credit, too, because he's been a Julio guy for years. And I've liked the player a lot too. And both of us were trying very hard to be reasonable. And you know what? Right. Julio Rodriguez makes it fun to be unreasonable. 28 home runs in his rookie season, 25 steals. He only played 132 games, but that's okay. 284 batting average. It's just about, if this guy stays healthy, this is the perennial MVP candidate in the American League. I mean, this is who this guy is. He is a 40-40 type player. Like, that's who this guy is. Those guys do not grow on trees. He has a good 13 years ahead of him. If you could keep a player forever, I don't care what you got to pay, what you got to do to get that first pick. Maybe, if you have an extra kid or laying around in your house, you're like, I got a bunch of kids. Maybe I'll put this kid up and see what he gets. Look, find a way to get Julio Rodriguez. Okay, I'm joking, everybody. I don't really want to sell kids. Although
you're not going to really trade a child for. I mean,
well, when they start to get to that preteen years, your kids are still tiny. You're going to start changing your tune about their availability. You're going to start at least looking at kicking the tires. See what's about. But Julio,
you're just hoping for good education with those kids. You're pretty good off with Julio already.
But Julio Rodriguez, let me tell you. I mean, look, the thing is, you want him to obviously dial back on the strikeouts a little bit. That's something you hope over time can happen. Will the league make adjustments to him? Yes, but I think this is a player that's going to adjust back. Welsh, Julio is your guy. Talk to it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's everything that you said. I'm still enamored personally, just off of my experience and, my interview way back that we all joke about. It's like, everyone's like, have you ever interviewed Julio? We talk about it a lot, but it's a fascinating, he was never going to be a stolen base guy. And he literally tells me like, I want to steal more bases. And that was his focus. And look at him now. I mean, this is a guy 25. That could be a easy 30-30, could be a 40-40 if you want to put it on it. It's an incredible bat. It's elite skills across the board. He's made himself into a perennial 5-tool player. And he is what Acuna and Tatis were last year, the year before that, like what you envisioned in those type of players. You have that with Julio. He overcame being pinched by umps early on in the season. He overcame all of the rookie struggles that you might think are going to surround a player. They continuously try to surround him with more talent. It's an easy bet also just with the age. I mean, he's got 2 or 3 years on pretty much everybody. So like where Ohtani as a daily moves player is so above and beyond everybody else, because if you can daily move him to a hitter and pitcher, there's no one more valuable
in the leagues where you have windows of time where you have restrictions of keeper.
Yeah.
Keeper restrictions, Ohtani probably is my number one, especially in the scenario you're paying out.
But that's why it's so fascinating. A 21-year-old 30-30 potential bat versus a, closing in on 30 multi-position. It's a fascinating debate on where the top goes. And the reiteration of all of this is we gave you guys a lot of players. It wasn't a top 10 overall keepers or anything like that. It's 20 keepers that you guys need to be paying attention to, but keeper leagues are not all equal. So understand that in your evaluation of these. Some keeper leagues, you can pay more attention to redraft values, some closer to dynasty. These are 20, regardless of your format, that you've got to pay attention to.
And those 20 are Ryan Mountcastle on Welsh's list at 10, Nick Lodolo, Austin Riley, Vinnie Pasquantino, Corbin Carroll, Oniel Cruz, Shane McClanahan, Bichette, Fernando Tatis Jr., and Ronald Acuna. My top 10 list of the guys, again, different reasons, all of them. Adley Rutschman at 10, Andres Gimenez at 9, Wander Franco at 8, Kyle Tucker at 7, Shohei Ohtani at 6, Yordan Álvarez. He almost said the Yordan because I just like saying Yordan so much. Yordan Álvarez, I like to say Jordan, but Yordan Álvarez, the Houston Astros, Bobby Witt. Houston something. I told you, dude. It's Texans. Still coming off football season. Álvarez, Houston Astros, not Texans. Bobby Witt from the Kansas City Royals, not the Chiefs. Juan Soto from the, there are no more Chargers in San Diego. Ronald Acuna from the Atlanta Braves, and Julio Rodriguez. Who are your guys? We want to know. Let us know. You can always tweet us at Is It The Welsh, at Joe Pisapia 17. And of course, don't forget, start preparing now. The Wizard is open for business. FantasyPros.com/draftwizard. Go get your draft on and go start getting ready for the 2023 season. That'll do it for us. But the story of the game goes on. For the Welsh, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.